welcome to ProLine. Taking a look at some college football action for 2014. I'm John Cranton in Las Vegas, joined by Jeff Sauter, who's been running Las Vegas Sports Services for 14 years. We're going to take a look at the ACC today, College Football Preview for 2014. But first, if you want to get on board Jim Feist's Early Bird Special, you get the entire NFL preseason from Jim, including his preseason game of the year, for $29. Just call 1-866-841-1655 and ask for that early bird special. Jeff, you love August football as well in the NFL, and you see plenty of betting edges. What special do you have for the viewers?
You're going to get the entire NFL preseason for only $19. Last year I had 5 plays of 20 stars or more. I was 4 in one of those plays. This year, get the entire month of August, the entire NFL preseason, actually, for only $19. Call WSS at 1-866-575-8918, 1-866-575-8918.
Okay, let's take a look at the ACC for the fall. Last year was really a 2-team race between Clemson and Florida State. Florida State ended up running the table and winning the national title. Have a few changes this year. You got Maryland leaving the ACC. They're off to the Big Ten. You got Louisville on board, joining recent newcomers Pitt and Syracuse. So, Jeff, let's start with the defending national champs. Do they have a chance to run the table again in this conference?
Yeah, absolutely. They might win. They might lose one game this year. I think they'll be like 11-1. But last year they 11-3 against the spread and 10-4 over the total. Last year they were favored by an average of 4 touchdowns per game. This year they probably won't be that much because we know everybody knows about them now. They're the defending national champions. They're 28th in rushing, 14th in passing. Of course, Jameis Winston is back if he can stay out of trouble. They lose their 2 of the top receivers, Kenny Shaw and Kelvin Benjamin, but Rashad Green is back. He led the team with 76 catches last year. Also, Carlos Williams, who averaged 8 yards per carry, is back at running back. They lost Brian Astoric, one of the top offensive linemen, but the rest of the starters are back on the line. Last year, they allowed only 12.1 points per game on defense, and that was helped by playing an ACC schedule. Obviously, they were lit up by Auburn in the BCS championship game. Seminoles lost one of the top defensive linemen in Timmy Jernigan. Plus, they'll have a new defensive coordinator. Ellis Johnson is now the new coordinator. Jeremy Pruitt went to Georgia. First game of the schedule will be one of the best of the year. It's versus Oklahoma State at Arlington, Texas. They get Notre Dame at home, and then on October 18th. The Notre Dame's on October 18th. Then they have road games at Louisville and Miami, and end the season, of course, versus Florida. Last year, the non-conference schedule included Nevada, Bethune-Cookman, and Idaho. This year, it's a little bit tougher with those games against Oklahoma State and Notre Dame. But I still think Florida State has a chance to go 11-1 this year, John.
Yeah, I'll take a look at Clemson. I'm not sure they can beat Florida State because they haven't been able to do that the last 2 years. In fact, Clemson has had 2 marvelous seasons, losing only 2 games apiece. However, each of those times they lost to the same teams. That was South Carolina and this Florida State team. Clemson Tigers have been a cover machine. The last 2 years, 19-8 against the spread. And the last 3 years, 26-14 against the spread. They're off an 11-2 straight-up season. And Dabo Swinney and the offensive coordinator Chad Morris, they love the wide-open attack. They have a pretty good team returning offense, 5 starters, and defense on 7. The offense averaged just over 40 points per game and 333 yards passing. That was 9th in the nation. They do lose Taj Boyd. Finally gets rid of his eligibility, so you've got some new look at quarterback. They got a couple of choices. Senior Cole Stout did see some time last year with 415 yards passing, 5 touchdowns and no interceptions, but they also have highly touted Chad Kelly available. He was with the team last year through 58 yards. The backfield has 2 new faces with the top rushers gone, but the guys were pretty productive. Zach Brooks averaged 5.1 yards per carry, and then senior running back DJ Howard had 213 yards. They ranked 3rd and 4th on the team in rushing. The offensive line has 3 starters back, and they have a very good tight end in Stanton, second there with 244 yards, and some very good experience at wideout, too. They did lose their star player, Sam Watkins, to the NFL, but sophomore wide receiver Mike Williams is back. He averaged 15.8 yards per catch. That actually led the team. And senior wide receiver Adam Humphries had 483 yards. Now, defensive coordinator Brent Venables, he's beginning his 3rd season. And, boy, this defense has been very good for Clemson, kind of underrated, with the exception of when they play Florida State. They allowed 22.2 points per game last year. That was 24th in the nation. They have a terrific defensive line. They've got a sack artist in Vic Beasley, an All-American, and they don't lose anybody from the front line, too. You got a senior defensive tackle in Grady Jarrett, Josh Watson, senior defensive end Corey Crawford back. So this Clemson defense is also going to be very good. When you look at the schedule, really what it comes down to is September. They're going to open at Georgia. That's a revenge game because Clemson won last year 38-35. And then the big showdown with Florida State, that's also going to be early, September 20th. So you get two of the first three games on the road for Clemson. And remember, South Carolina and Florida State beat them the last couple of years, 49-37 2 years ago to Florida State, and 51-14 last year. So those are the big challenges early. All right, Jeff, we got a new team here in Louisville coming aboard, and there's some changes, too, for the Cardinal.
Yeah, it's kind of like Back to the Future. Bobby Petrino is back at coach at Louisville. It's come full circle now. He's back to where he started and was very successful as a head coach. Last year, Louisville was 11-2, 6-7 against the spread. This year, the biggest question mark would be at quarterback. Somebody has to play Teddy Bridgewater. Looks like it's going to be sophomore Will Gardner. He's in limited action. He's had 2 TDs, 112 yards, but they do have a great offensive line, so that's going to help a lot. 3 all-conference starters are back, plus Dominic Brown's back at running back, and Michael Dyer, who used to play at Auburn, is also one of the running backs here for the Cardinals. He had a great spring game, too. 150 yards rushing, 14 carries. Top wide receiver Devontae Parker is also back. The Cards lose 3 starters on the defensive line. The defense was second in the nation last year, allowing only 12.2 points per game. Todd Grantham is a new defensive coordinator. He comes over from Georgia. He was there for 4 years. Louisville opens up at home with Miami. Then they have a revenge game. That is a revenge game for the Hurricanes. They blown out 36-9 by Louisville last year in the bowl game. And also on Notre Dame on November 22nd. Toughest conference game will be at Clemson, and then we get Louisville against Florida State at home. Breaking in a new quarterback here, and there's nobody better to do that, Bobby Petrino, but still, I think Louisville's looking at more of an 8-4 season, John.
Well, I'll take a look at the Syracuse Orangemen. They were 4-4 in the ACC last year. Did have a winning record of 7-6, and they were very good at covering numbers, 8-4-1 against the spread. And Scott Schaefer's in his second year. He's got 8 starters back on offense, 7 on defense. This offense really wasn't very good last year, despite that winning record, 22.7 points per game. That ranked 100th in the nation, and it was a one-dimensional Orange offense. It was all rushing, 38th in the country, with 194.8 yards rushing per game. The passing game ranked 102nd. They do have the junior quarterback, Terrell Hunt, back, but he threw for just 10 touchdowns, 8 interceptions, 61% completions, just over 1,600 yards passing. But he also was second on the team in rushing with 500 yards, 4.7 yards per carry. They have very good running back depth with Prince Tyson Gully back. He had 456 yards, and George Morris, plus wide receiver Ashton Broyland is back. He led the team with 452 yards. But still, when you look at the offense, they got 4 starters back on the offensive line. So the Syracuse Orangemen are going to, again, be a run-oriented offense. And the defense should be better, but they were suspect at times last year, giving up 25.4 points per game. The defensive line returned several key players, including Eric Crum. The secondary is experienced, but boy, they struggle against some good offensive teams. They gave up 59 points to Florida State, 49 to Clemson, and even Northwestern hung up 48 on them, so that is a concern. The schedule, they do get Notre Dame at home early in the year, September 27th, and that's part of a stretch, playing 5 of the first 6 games at home. On the downside, they played 4 of their final 6 games on the road, including Wake, Clemson, Pitt, and BC. This was a team that was good under the total last year at 7-6, and I would call for more of that with their run-oriented team and pretty good defense. But I'm not going to call for a winning season. I don't trust this quarterback or this offense for Syracuse at all. All right, Jeff, how about NC State? They are rebuilding under a second-year coach.
Yeah, well, they're extremely young. Last year they were young, inexperienced, and showed they were 3-9 straight up, 4-8 against the spread, 0-8 in the ACC straight up. This year they returned 12 starters, 6 offense, 6 defense. Plus the schedule is almost embarrassing here. 3 of their non-conference games are against Georgia Southern, Old Dominion, and Presbyterian, and so they're going to have a rude awakening on September 27th when they suddenly have to play Florida State. The athletic director came right out and said it. She said that when she makes no apologies, she said that they have to schedule pretty much these easy teams to be competitive right now, and it's pretty honest, but I don't think the fans would be too happy about that when they're paying money to see these non-conference games against these kind of teams. Jacoby Brissett's a transfer from Florida. He'll be the quarterback. He passed for 455 yards, 3 TDs, and 74 passes with 4 interceptions and limited action with the Gators. He sat out last year due to the transfer rules. Hopefully he'll stay healthy because the Wolfpack has 0 experience behind him. 5 offensive line starters are back, but they allowed 35 sacks last year, so that might not be a good thing. Top running back, Shadwick Thornton, and 3 top receivers are back. Defense was near the bottom in just about every category last year, and that's going to be another question mark this year. Because of that ridiculous schedule, they might eke out a 6-6 season and get to a bowl game, but they really won't deserve it, Jeff.
Yeah, the same thing applies here for Wake Forest, and they definitely won't get to a bowl game as they're rebuilding from scratch off a 4-8 season and 5-6-1 against the spread, just 2-6 in the ACC. But they have a new coach for the first time since 2001. Jim Grove is gone, so Dave Clawson comes in from Bowling Green. He was known as a good recruiter and motivator and kind of a player's coach, but boy, he's got a lot of work to do with this offense. They were 117th in the country in scoring, just 18.3 points per game. They couldn't run the football, ranked 116, and they couldn't pass either, ranked 96th. And remember, they had a 4-year starting quarterback in Tanner Price last season. He's gone, so this offense is starting from scratch on so many levels with a new coach and a new playbook. The quarterback situation is totally a big question mark. Sophomore quarterback Tyler Cameron is here. He had 0 touchdowns, 3 interceptions last year, just 85 yards. They lose their top 2 rushers. And the defense was actually decent last year, believe it or not, 24 points per game, 38th in the country, and they were 5th in the ACC in total defense. And they get a very good defensive coordinator in Mike Elko. He ran some of the best MAC units while at Bowling Green. He's got a very good linebacking core to work with, including Brandon Chubb, Hunter Williams, and Teddy Matthews. So that's the strength right now as they rebuild. When you look at the schedule, they're kind of unlucky as they start the season playing 4 of 6 games on the road. One of them is at Utah State, September 13th, so they're flying all the way out to Utah State. It's just a tough start. And they also have to play at Louisville and at Florida State. If you like to play totals, you want to keep Wake Forest in mind with what should be a decent defense. They were 9-3 under the total last year. That's part of a 15-4 run under the total coming into the new season. That's really the way to look at the Wake Forest this season, is games low scoring and under the total. All right, Jeff, let's move to the ACC Coastal Division. We're going to have to start with defending champion Duke, and we're not talking basketball here.
No, David Cutler's doing a tremendous job there for this long-suffering football program. 10-4 last year, 10-4 against the spread, and they're going to be good again this year. 14 starters return. They had one of the best offenses in the country last year. 32.8 points per game, 178 yards rushing, 248 yards passing. Quarterback Anthony Boone would be the starter this year. Offensive coordinator Kurt Roper went to Florida. The new play caller is going to be Scotty Montgomery. He's been an assistant with Duke last few years anyway. Before that, he spent 3 years with the Pittsburgh Steelers. The other QB, Brandon Connett, will probably be used mostly as a runner this season. Plenty of talent at wide receiver with Jamison Crowder and Max McCaffrey, plus tight end Braxton Deaver. 2 top running backs are back, Josh Snead and Shaquille Powell. 3 starters return on the offensive line. The defense is going to be the problem here. They're going to probably take a step back. They lose 3 starters up front, and 2 of the top defensive backs are gone. Defense allowed 418 yards per game last year. The Blue Devils have a good chance to be 4-0 going into the game at Miami on September 27th. The first 4 opponents are Elon, Troy, Kansas, and Tulane. So that's similar to the NC State schedule there. They got Georgia Tech, Pittsburgh, and Syracuse on the road. Virginia Tech, North Carolina at home. They have another good chance to win the Coastal Division. The defense would be the question mark, though. And I look for maybe 8-4, another 9-3 season for Duke, John.
Okay, I'm going to take a look at Virginia Tech, and here's a team that has had 11 losses in the past 2 years. We're not used to saying that at all about these Hokies. 8-5 straight up they were last year, just 4-8-1 against the spread. A money burner for Frank Beamer, 7-5-1 under the total. The offense does return 8 starters and the defense 5, but you have to start with the offense because that was a major problem last year. 101st in the country in scoring, just 22.5 points per game. Struggled running the football, 119.8 yards rushing. Passing game wasn't bad, but they have new quarterbacks this season. You got a senior in Mark Leal, but he only had 155 yards, no touchdowns, 2 picks. He did play in the Sun Bowl against UCLA, throwing for 130 yards, but he wasn't effective with 2 picks, and it was a 42-12 loss. Plus, he's been battling a recent knee injury. One guy to keep an eye on is sophomore quarterback Brandon Motley. He actually looked pretty good in the spring, and they have a couple of highly touted freshmen also coming in. But quarterback situation is very fluid and unstable at this point. The running game, on the plus side, you got 5 offensive linemen back. You got Trey Edmonds, who had 675 yards, and C.J. Coleman. They were first and third on the Hokies in rushing. On the other hand, this rushing offense ranked 109th in the country, so there's plenty of experience and talent to be better, but they weren't good at all last year. The defense, though, is not a concern for Bud Foster. Virginia Tech ranked 11th in the country in points allowed last year, just 19.3 points per game. The defensive line for 2014 is really solid. You got Luther Maddie up front. He's the sack artist, 6.5 sacks last year. He's going to be back. They also have Corey Marshall back, and he missed all of last year with an injury. So this is a pretty good front line for Virginia Tech. They should be one of the best defensive teams in the ACC and the country. There are some young linebackers, but overall it's a pretty good secondary. And when you look at the schedule, well, they got week 2 at Ohio State. There's a killer early, but they're not going to face Clemson, Florida State, or Louisville, and they get to place Miami and Georgia Tech at home. Keep in mind, Virginia Tech's revenge game is November 12th. That's against Duke. They were a 12.5-point favorite, lost the game 13-10. A lot of low-scoring games last year. And that ties into some total trends, too. Virginia Tech is on a 23-14-2 run under the total the last 3 years. And under Frank Beamer, over 7 years, they've been a terrific road team, 26-11 straight up, 20-17-1 against the spread. All right, Jeff, how about North Carolina? Plenty of offense, but no defense at that program.
Yeah, about the same this year, too. Last year, they were 7-6, 8-5 against the spread. They started off 1-5. Then the schedule got a little easier, and they won 6 of the last 7, ended up on a 7-1 against the spread mark. The offense came alive in a 34-10 win versus Boston College. Then they averaged 41 points the last 7 games. They returned 7 on offense, 7 on defense. And the offense should be good this year with quarterback Marquise Williams. Last year he threw for 15 touchdowns, almost 1,700 yards in 5 starts. Backfield returns T.J. Logan and Romar Harris and Morris. But they lost 2 of their best offensive linemen, James Hurst and Russell Bodine. Defense, as I said, doesn't look too great this year. They lost some key players on the line and the secondary, although the linebacking looks pretty strong. They're pretty deep there. Last year they were the worst run defense team in the conference. This year they get East Carolina on the road, Notre Dame on the road, Clemson on the road. They get Virginia Tech, Georgia Tech, and Pittsburgh at home. I'll go with a 7-5 season for Carolina there, John.
Well, I'm going to take a look at the Pitt Panthers. They are off a winning season of 7-6, but just 5-7-1 against the spread, and in conference play, just 3-5. They're on a 7-3 run under the total, but it's a little bit surprising because the offense is very good for Coach Paul Chris, but they do have some changes. Quarterback Tom Savage is gone. Despite 8 starters back on offense, they need a new starter, and it's going to be a searching for one. They got sophomore quarterback Chad Wojtek. He only threw for 116 yards last year, and he's kind of the winner by default because they're really very soft as far as talent that they can throw in. They do have a very strong backfield. You get a pair of runners who've been outstanding. In fact, last year they had over 700 yards rushing apiece, and they're back for this year. You get senior running back Isaac Bennett. He had 7 touchdowns, 4.7 yards per carry, 797 yards. And then sophomore running back James Conner is back, 799 yards, 5.5 yards per carry. Good news is the offensive line returns most of its best players, although they have struggled at times over the last 2 years protecting the quarterback. And they do have a very good wide receiver in Tyler Boyd. He had over 1,100 yards receiving last year, and a very good senior tight end in Manasseh Garner, 391 yards. So you got 2 of the top 3 targets back, but the big question mark is that quarterback spot, and we all know how essential that is. And then the defense for Pitt, well, they weren't very good last year, 70th in the nation in points allowed, 27.2 points per game, and they lose their best player on the defensive line to the NFL in Aaron Donald. And you got defensive end Brian Murphy. He chose not to return, so a weak to below average defense loses some of its best players. Now, the schedule for Pitt is easy early. I can see them with a 4-1 start, but boy, after that, there's some tough games against Duke, Syracuse, Virginia Tech, although those games are at home. So because of the schedule, they should be bowling, squeezing out another winning season as long as the quarterback play is not a disaster. And I wouldn't be surprised if that 7-3 run under the total could continue with the ground game and a defense that does have some question marks, but has been very good going under the total because the totals are probably going to be very high for this team. All right, Jeff, the Miami Hurricanes. I mean, this is a team that had a hot start last year. but then a cold finish. What's the story with the Hurricanes?
Yeah, they started off 7-0, then the last 6 games they lost 4 of them. They ended up on a 1-7 against the spread run. They returned 12 starters, 5 on offense, 7 on defense. Duke Johnson's back. They're running 6.3 yards per carry last year. His backups will be Gus Edwards, who had a really good spring game scrimmage, and Joe Yerby will also be back at running back. The big question right now is quarterback. Ryan Williams was going to be the starting quarterback, but he tore his ACL in the spring scrimmage, so now they have to go with the redshirt freshman Kevin Olson. That's going to be the biggest question. My 3 starters are back on the offensive line, though. Stacey Coley returns at wide receiver. He had 7 touchdowns, 33 receptions last year. Defense has been a big problem the last couple of years, and it'll probably only be slightly better this season. Last year, the Hurricanes allowed 26.8 points per game. 2 years ago, 30.5. They have tough road games. They open at Louisville, and they are at Nebraska, Georgia Tech, Virginia Tech. They get Duke and Florida State at home. 2 big revenge games, October 23rd at Virginia Tech, and also that opener with Louisville. The Cardinals blew them out in that bowl game, 36-9. So with that quarterback situation and the poor defense, it opens a way for Duke to win the Coastal Division. I think Miami could be very fortunate to go 8-4 this year, John.
All right, I like this Georgia Tech team for 2014. They squeezed out a winning season last year, 7-6. 5-8 against the spread. And Paul Johnson is 31-17 here in Georgia Tech, but just 14-13 the last 2 years, and only 1-5 in bowl games. But boy, this looks like a pretty good team for the coming fall. First of all, their ground game is sensational under him. 299 yards rushing per game. That was 6th in the country. And boy, could they score 35 points per game. They do have some question marks. Their quarterback is Vad Lee. He transferred out, so they have Justin Thomas stepping in. He's only a sophomore. Didn't have a lot of time, 1 touchdown, 2 picks, but he was very good rusher with 513 yards. He's talented but inexperienced. You got 3 starters on the offensive line are lost, but it's not as bad as you might think because the senior guard, Shaquille Mason, he's an All-American candidate, and he is back. And you got sophomore center Fred Burden and junior tackle Aaron Joe. They missed most of last season with injuries, so it's a deeper offensive line than the overall numbers might suggest. And one guy to keep an eye on for the Yellow Jackets would be this freshman running back in Travis Custis. Now, he was an all-state back from Atlanta. He was coveted by Wisconsin and Florida State, turned them down, signed with Georgia Tech last year, but he had to delay his enrollment, so he's available to play. Sort of, if you're looking for a sleeper player, the freshman running back, Travis Custis for Georgia Tech, would be one to keep in mind. And his defense, boy, they make great strides under defensive coordinator Ted Roof. Just 22.8 points per game last year. That was 29th in the nation. So when you look at the points scored and the offensive run production and the improvement of the defense, they probably should have been better than 7-6. This year for Georgia Tech should be a 3-0 start, but of course they had that last year too. But then the schedule isn't kind. They got road dates with Georgia, North Carolina, Pitt, and Virginia Tech. And then they played 4 of the final 6 on the road. Georgia Tech was 8-5 over the total last year. I could see them doing that again. But I think it's a pretty good Georgia Tech team that should be better than the 7-6 they were last year. Finally, we got this Boston College team that also had a winning record of 7-6 straight up. 7-6 against the spread. Did pretty well despite playing 5 of the last 7 games on the road. They bring a 6-0 run over the total into the new season. And frankly, I'm not sure how they won that many games last year under Steve Adazio. And the offense was terrible. 27.7 points per game, but they were completely one-dimensional. 112th in the nation in passing. 20th in the country in rushing with 212.5 yards rushing per game. The problem for this year is they don't have a quarterback. They lose Chase Reddick, so they're searching for a new quarterback. And they lost their top running backs as well. So a team that was one-dimensional on offense has to replace all those talent in the backfield. They bring in Josh Bordner, or he is the returner, but he didn't see a lot of time last year. And they have a couple of freshmen in Darius Wade and James Welch. But overall, boy, there's a lot of question marks with this team. And one other guy to keep in mind is a transfer from the University of Florida, believe it or not, and Tyler Murphy could step in. But right now, a lot of question marks with the Boston College quarterback and running back situation. And then you got this defense. Well, they were awful last year. It's hard to believe they had a winning record, 28.9 points per game they allowed. They ranked 108th in the country in pass efficiency defense. They gave up 26 passing touchdowns. And in the bowl game, they stepped up to play Arizona, 7-point underdog. Forget it. They got destroyed 42-19. You look at the last 5 games BC played, defense gave up 24, 21, 26, 34, and 42 points. I think BC overachieved last year and comes back to the pack with a losing record this year. All right, to make sure you check out Proline TV on Facebook as well as JimFeist.com for more college football previews. From Jeff Saad, who runs Las Vegas Sports Services, I'm John Crane in Las Vegas. We'll see you then.